I'm Ken Rakowski. You're watching Business Rockstars. It's not too often where you get to spend time with somebody that's affected your life in a positive way. From having Steve Jobs as his first employee, creating in-car navigation, Atari, and Chuck E. Cheese, he's the founder of all of them, Mr. Nolan Bushnell. Hey, Nolan, thanks a lot for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
Nolan, you have failed fantastically. You know what I mean by that. You are the master at failure. Not in a bad way, but in a good way, right?
Well, I actually don't think I've ever failed.
Oh, come
I've
on.
always learned, though the business hasn't done what I've wanted to. There's always a learning moment.
At every point, every business?
Every business.
So let's say the most colossal of all your businesses would be what? Do you think it'd be
Androbot. Clearly.
Androbot? And how's that Androbot business going? I don't think it ever made it.
It
did
failed. I put $28 million into it and sold it for $2 million.
It doesn't sound like a good return.
That's
but the
not
biggest
great.
problem was, first, you were a bit early, don't you think?
I was literally 20 years ahead of the time of the technology.
20 years ahead. And then technology-wise, there was a big problem all around, I believe it's carpeting, right?
Yeah, static electricity caused the robots to fail. And when you have 50 pounds going lickety-split across your living room, it's not a good thing.
It's not. But let's go to some of your big success stories. Atari theoretically really did bring the video game to the home.
Absolutely.
And Atari was a huge success story, but through the process, you kind of did the whole Hollywood model, and that was you faked it till you made it, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, let's talk about Atari.
Well, Atari really happened because we figured out a way to do it before the microprocessor was invented.
Okay.
And so cost was a real problem in those days, and we figured out a way to do video games, using basically baling wire and string.
Yeah, but let's go back to the fake until you make it. You did this big presentation to Sears,
Yes.
and you were going to bring them this working, ready-to-go model, looked ready, looked amazing. What was really the story behind that situation?
Well, we created a console out of wood, painted it so that it looked like plastic, and screwed it to the table so that, because if you picked it up, you knew it wasn't real. And then all the electronics was in a milk crate about like this. But we knew we could squeeze it down onto a chip.
Right.
And it was below the table, covered by a shroud.
And
They bought it.
they didn't just buy it. You had a problem, and that was they bought it too well, right?
Yeah, they came in and said, "How many do you think you can build?" And I had no idea. And so I grabbed my manufacturing guy and says, "How many do you think we can do between now and Christmas?" He says, "About 25,000." And so I went back into Sears and I said, "We can do about 75,000." And to which he next day gave us a purchase order for 150,000.
How did you do it? How did you manage? Because obviously you were well over what you guys could do. How did you satisfy that?
Well, it's really interesting that once you deal with a concrete problem, you bring out all your creativity and you say, what are your stoppers? What can we do to make 150,000? We never thought of that.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you get an extra tool for the injection molding. The chips, once you got them working, you could build them by the millions. And then how do you put them all together? And, like actually that year we did a funny thing that we had all the executives run the night shift. Before, for the 2 months before Christmas, we just couldn't hire enough people
You
to
had
put the
people
things
constantly
together.
working.
Constantly working.
Wow. So that situation, which seemed to be a pretty big brick wall you were about to hit, turned out to be a great opportunity for yourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, it really put us on the map.
Let's go back to Atari also. You had some unique employees that I believe created a game called Breakout.
Steve Jobs and Wozniak were the people who did Breakout for me.
They worked for you.
They worked for me. And Steve was a little difficult, and everybody kind of wanted to fire him. And I said, no, I'll just put him on my night shift.
Okay.
So we had an engineering we didn't have an engineering night shift, but I created one just for Steve. And I figured, hey, that's going to be a great thing, because I knew he was just thick as thieves with Wozniak, who was technically brilliant.
Right.
And I thought, okay, if I put Steve Jobs on the night shift, I'll get Steve Wozniak for free. 2 Steves for the price of 1.
Did you get that?
Oh, yeah.
That's a good deal. Now, Steve finished the game for you. Did you have any problems with Steve's working for you? Were they against the grain? Were they...
Steve was always a difficult employee if you measured it by normal standards.
Okay.
He basically, if he thought you were a jerk, he would tell you that you're a jerk.
No filters.
Stupidest guy in the world. You're the stupidest guy in the room. That's kind of offensive if you happen to be called that.
By Steve.
By Steve.
As a kid, right?
As a kid, 19 years old.
So I want you to think about opportunities that popped up while you were doing Atari. Like, for example, did Steve ever have an idea for like something like Apple during that time?
Not during that time. After he left, he came back to me and asked if I would invest $50,000 for a third of Apple computer, because he wanted to do a mini computer or a microcomputer.
Right.
And I said no, which in retrospect was a bad decision.
But you're telling me you could have had a third of Apple?
Right.
Okay. A bit too early with that idea, right? For you.
Well, it's one of those things you cannot deal with the woulda, shoulda, couldas in life. I mean, because, I was part of the investor package for Cisco. And, Cisco Systems. I had part of the Series A funding for that. And the minute it became public, I sold, which was, I left about 1,000x on the table for that. Stuff like that.
No, but it's still pretty fascinating because, Nolan, during that time, you had no idea you were creating the future for people. You had no idea.
Oh, I did a little bit.
Really? How did you feel, or why did you feel you were creating some type of future path?
I knew that video games were going to be important because every technology people have applied to games. Printed paper, playing cards, knuckle bones, and around the caves in a cave. I mean, people are game players by their DNA, if you would. And I knew that the computer was the ultimate game playing system.
If you could go back to those Atari days, what would you change or fix or modify?
I think that I wouldn't have sold to Warner, even though I needed a whole bunch of money. The first thing that Warner did was destroy our corporate culture, which I think was really unique and very powerful. In fact, it's the corporate culture that is Silicon Valley today.
The corporate culture that you created back then, you've basically produced in every company you've had moving forward.
That's correct.
What is that unique formula you do? What is that corporate culture recipe?
3 elements. The first one is choose your core team extremely careful. They're like your seed crystals. And if you have a damaged one, they replicate themselves throughout their organization.
How do you choose that core team? Do you have a secret?
Yeah, enthusiasm.
Just somebody that has a lot of enthusiasm?
It turns out that people who are enthusiastic and curious, you can train for everything else.
Okay.
And if they're enthusiastic, they will solve problems.
Okay, you said 3 things. That's one core team. What's number 2?
The second thing that you want to do is make sure that you have a very flat organization structure and you get used to saying yes.
So when you say flat, no one's reporting to a manager, to a manager. Everyone's evened out.
Because what you want to do is restrict or eliminate people that can say no to creatives.
Okay, and that obviously has worked for you. What's number 3?
The third one is treat everyone like an adult.
Okay.
Focus strictly on merit. Let them come to work dressed any way they want. They can come to work when they want, leave when they want, or not even come at all. If you have adults, they will self-modify and regulate themselves.
So it's all about finishing the project, getting that done.
Be the main cheerleader. Let everybody know clearly what you expect of them.
Without a doubt, that is the corporate culture of Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
It is. Every business up there, from Facebook to even Apple, believes that methodology. That's exciting to see that.
Yeah, you just have to assume that the people you've got are self-regulating.
So you took this idea of what Atari was, and then you kind of moved into a bunch of other businesses, but you did land into Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah.
Chuck E. Cheese is an interesting story. You took food, and you took games, and you took adults and kids, and you blended them all together.
Yes.
Was that the whole plan?
The plan was to build an arcade standalone and sort of tack a restaurant along to bring people in when they got hungry.
It was an afterthought, was the restaurant?
No, we always felt that it was a blended concept, but it just worked really well. We could give tokens away with pizza, and the economic model was really meant to bring families together to play games and have fun.
And that grew to be how big, Chuck E. Cheese?
Right now, I think they have about 580 restaurants. I sold it when it was about 250.
Why did you want to leave it?
I am a good business starter. When it becomes just running the recipe, there are people that are so much better than I am.
But you know that about yourself. You know what your core competence is. That's sparking the idea and getting it going, right?
Exactly.
So do you ever feel that maybe you can bring other people in to manage it and let it move on its own as long as you start it? Can't you still own equity in these companies?
Every time I've done that, it hasn't worked well. It just seems like you have to keep your hand on the tiller, no matter how good the people are. And so I just say, okay, this is a good inflection point for me. And I have 5-year ADD. I get really bored with doing things the same way all the time.
After 5 years, you're just too bored. You got to get rid of it.
Well, not only that, I think after 5 years, I'm destructive, because when the business model says, just replicate this thing because it's working so well, I want to still mess with it.
See, but you're a constant innovator. You have to innovate, change, tweak, and enhance.
I have to keep myself interested. I have to have problems to solve.
You're a very selfish man.
Yes.
But you went through all these businesses, you created all these companies. In every instance, there was competition right around the corner. There was. For Atari, Chuck E. Cheese, Andrew Bot, in-car navigation, even your current company, which is all around education. There is competition. How do you deal with competition?
What you want to do is always get the innovator's bonus. And the innovator's bonus says, if you are not doing something remarkable, that means, do people remark about it? Then do something else. Because when you're doing something remarkable, everybody wants to write about it. Everybody wants to take a piece of it. Everybody wants to be on that path. And you win.
Okay, now you have to be a little more truthful. You are all about diversion also when it comes to competition. You like tricking them, right?
Well, I think chess is a wonderful game. Go is a wonderful game. Business is a better game.
Okay.
Because what I actually try to do is understand the people who are running the other companies. And I try to play them like a fiddle. And I've been known to plant false information, be a little tricky. Mm-hmm. It's a game. And I think sometimes your stealth strategies are just so much fun.
But it seems ironic. That's what Steve Jobs did.
Oh, yeah.
He did the same things you did, from Atari to Chuck E. Cheese to all your businesses. Stealth. You diverted. You never really told anybody until it was time. Steve did the same thing.
I hung around with Steve a lot. Even after he left Atari, we became good friends. In fact, I hadn't really realized that he thought of me as a mentor until the Isaacson book. But I guess we probably would hang out at least one Saturday a month in the morning. He drives a motorcycle up, and he'd drink tea, I'd drink coffee, and we'd go up and talk about business. And it was really fun because I felt like Steve had one speed on,
Always on. Yeah.
always on, and he was a sponge. He would have questions that were some of the most profound that I'd ever heard.
Do you think you can quantify what it would take to find the next Steve Jobs?
Absolutely. I believe that there are thousands of Steve Jobses in companies today. And in fact, I've written a book called Finding the Next Steve Jobs. And that book really details the essence. And it's more about the corporate cultures. Steve had a unique ability to not just have ideas, but to force them into the marketplace in execution. A lot of the people who currently are this next Steve Jobs don't have a venue that allows them to execute their ideas.
A venue in what aspect?
Well, $10 million to vote on a product. One of the great things that's happening is crowdfunding, kickstarting, angel list, what have you. This is enabling what I think is going to be the golden age of entrepreneurship and innovation. We'll have more disruptive ideas coming out of these incubated companies than ever before in the history of mankind.
Now, I know you personally. You are, and I don't want to say this to be a detriment, but you're one of my older friends. But you hang out with a very young crowd. You really do. Talk about that environment you hang out in.
I look out on the world through eyes that feel 14.
You mean you think you are 14 years old?
Yeah, I do.
You're just trapped inside this person's
trapped
body.
in this old fart's body. But and you know, I found that a lot of people who I consider to be youngsters have had trips around the sun like 80. And I think that if you maintain a certain level of curiosity and enthusiasm, you can be any age you want to be, independent of how many trips around the sun you've had.
Let's talk about how many. You have a lot of kids.
I have 8 children.
You have 8 children, and you have a belief mechanism all around why you have so many children. What's the reason?
Intellectual arrogance.
Yeah.
I think the world needs more smart, well brought up, and curious and creative children.
And your wife Nancy and you apparently can procreate pretty well.
And we've proven the efficacy of it. All of our kids are absolutely first rate, brilliant, creative, fun. You'd love to hang out with all of them. You've hung out with
all great kids. You're right.
Yeah.
All great kids. So any more?
I think no.
You're done with that.
I think I'm done.
And now, looking at the current technology crowd that's out there, who do you feel is the bright stars within these companies that you see in Silicon Valley or down in the creative coast of Los Angeles or anywhere around the world that are bright stars?
I really, really like Google.
So company-wise, you like the company Google.
They have what I consider to be a stable of creative, capable people. I think that there's probably a third of the Kickstarters that I've seen have really people that have some of that spark.
Sure.
It's early, but I think right now the people who are using these tools, they're digital and they're new age. I believe it attracts the best of the best.
So you mentioned you have that 5-year ADD process, right? And you have to be right now at another 5-year span of something. Where's your current passion? What kind of business?
I'm going to fix education.
Is it broken?
Oh yeah.
Bad.
Really badly. But it's what I've decided to do, and this happened kind of on a fluke. I just asked the simple question: how do people learn?
Okay.
What's the brain science behind learning? And if you were to design a system that uses no brain science, you'd find that we've got that right now.
The current education system.
Current education system. So I feel in some ways that what I've always done is taken truths that are in the lab, published it and made it available to everybody. And so BrainRush is my current company that is changing the way you can teach the first, pretty much foundational information for kids. We know right now how long it takes for a student to learn something, to within a few seconds. And so we can start to cross-correlate, use big data, increase our capabilities. Right now, we're at least 10 times faster than the classroom. We think that once we fine-tuned our algorithm, we'll be over 20 times.
What does that mean, 20 times? So a child that goes to...
learning and remembering everything you learned in high school in 6 months.
So you could do high school in 6 months?
Yeah. 4 years of high school in 6 months.
So if you,
we're not doing it now.
Well, no, I understand
but
what
I
you're
think
saying.
that's what we're going to do.
But let's say kids who start school around 5 or 6 years old, by the time they would go to high school, what would that be the equivalent to? Are we saying kids will not be going to high school when they're 17? They would actually finished it by the time they're 10 or 12?
I think if I were designing the world, it'd be different. Get the academics out of the way and then focus every kid on projects. Because projects is where you really maintain and foster creativity. Right now, schools are training out creativity, and I think creativity is the next big competition worldwide.
Absolutely.
And so spend an hour a day on academics. The rest of the time, work on your projects. Every high school kid should know how to market on eBay, should know how to program a video game, should know how to cook a gourmet meal in a commercial kitchen.
And you're going to put all that together inside your education?
Absolutely. They've got to have this diversity of skills. They've got to be doers, because it turns out that when you do a lot of different projects, you increase your IQ. Your brain gets bigger, more capable. And so tool use, massively neurogenic. And so getting the academics out of the way, focusing the rest of the school day on projects, that'll keep creativity alive, enthusiasm alive, and it will create a life for these kids that will be truly astounding.
Nolan, you're known to have a great sense of humor, right? I mean, you know that. Other people say it too. I was told that you always have maybe one or two good jokes in your arsenal. Do you have a good entrepreneurial joke or a true story that's humorous?
Oh, gee, I've got a lot of those, but let's see. Okay. This is one that I use to get an upgrade.
All right.
This is an airline joke. The guy's driving too fast on the way to the airport. He runs over an armadillo. He thinks, hey, I'm going to my sister's house. I can make chili out of that. So he goes back, puts it in a plastic bag, gets to the airport, goes to put it in the overhead, and the steward says, you can't bring that on board. And he says, well, why not? It's carrying.
So Nolan Bushnell, I really appreciate you spending time with us, sharing your insights, your ideas. Nolan Bushnell, thanks a lot for being on Business Rockstars.
It was fun.
I'm Ken Rakowski. You're watching Business Rockstars.